I'm going to do today is just walk you through some NPCs and show you how things are formatted for the AU and basically beyond Skyrim writing. We're going to go over the existing examples, and then at the end, I'm going to give you another document that has a lot of problems with it, and I want to see how you do finding the problems, and then we'll go over that. And yeah, so that's pretty much the format. It'll start fairly basic, but I will get more detailed. So if you find yourself saying, well, I already know all this, just wait for it. I'm not going to be checking the voice chat while I'm talking because I have enough problems focusing on my notes and my screen at the same time. So don't ask questions there because I won't be reading them. But I will have time for questions at the end on the voice chat or on the lecture hall. So I will be throwing a lot of information at you, but don't worry because Pat assures me this is all going to be on YouTube, so you can always review it later. All right. So I'm going to start with the game writing channel. You should all be able to see my screen as I go. If you enlarge your screen share, you'll be able to see the text a little better when we get to that. All right. So first of all, if you're a new student, you have to know about the pins, and those are up here at the top. Click on the pin messages, and you will see some documents that I'll be referring to. The first one is the welcome document, and it is, as it says, a document welcoming you to the writing program, but it also contains all the examples for quests and NPCs and flavor texts and everything else. They're all linked through the welcome document. And there are 13 examples at the moment, so that's a lot of text that's available to you through there. Just running quickly through here, there's the guide to peer review. We encourage peers to review each other's work, but please read the guide to get a sense of exactly what you should be doing with peer review. It's not editing or correcting other people's things, but it's commenting. And then there are 2 style guides linked here. The Unified Style Guide for Beyond Skyrim is like 20-some pages. It's long, it's detailed, it has pretty much everything we think you should know, but it's a lot. So I've done a condensed version of just the most important things, and that's the AU's Writer's Guide there. And then finally, Pat has a link to the YouTube channel where there's videos by teachers in every discipline, and they're wonderful. So even if you're not just sticking to writing, I encourage you to look at all of those, and you'll find all kinds of really cool teacher videos. So that's the pins. So we're going to start by going through the welcome document. And this shows you what happens at each level of the program. We have student level, and then you move on to scribe when the teachers think you're ready for that. And then you move on to mystic after that. So this tells you what the assignments are, but you'll see the links down here. To the basic NPC, to brief linear quest, and so forth. What I'm going to do today is go back and forth between the basic NPC, Vipsania, and the more advanced NPC, Gwinara. So you will see me going back and forth. I'll mostly be on the basic NPC, but sometimes I will go over to the other one. So that's why it's helpful to have a full screen. So let's start. First of all, at the beginning of all the examples, it shows you the color coding, which I will talk about later. When you do your own NPC, obviously you don't have to have this entire header up there. But before we really get into the nitty-gritty of actual NPC writing, I just want to go over some basic Google Docs stuff that you need to do. First of all, you need to get rid of smart quotes and ellipses. And the way you do that is you go to Tools, and then Preferences, and make sure that this Use Smart Quotes under General Preferences does not have a check mark. And then go over to Substitutions and make sure that the 3 dots does not have a check mark, because Google Docs would like to replace every 3 dots with a single character, and that's not readable for game writing. So you want to make sure that this is unchecked as well. And then for a lot of the non-US people, it's important to change the language by going to File, Language, and then scroll down till you get English United States, because the spelling changes will be marked for you. If you are using British spelling, it'll be highlighted as something that needs to be changed. So we use United States spelling for all Beyond Skyrim documents. It just makes it easier if you already do that. Also, standard type size is Arial 11 point. Don't do anything weird like, Comic Sans or anything like that, but just normal type. And then finally, and probably most importantly, for new students, you have to allow us to see your documents. You have to hit the share button and make sure it shows anyone with a link can be a commenter. If you have it as viewer, we can't leave you comments, and neither can your peers. So you'll often see us telling students to, please give us access. This is how you do that. All right, so that's some basics. There's also auto numbering, which I will talk about a bit later, but that's these are some of the Google Doc basics to start with. Then game writing basics. There are just certain rules that we have, like player lines are in bold. Whatever the player says is in bold, and whatever the NPC says is not. It makes it easy to find which lines need to be recorded and which ones don't. Also, there's no italics, no dashes, no numerals are allowed because of just the constraints of the game writing, the program that this is all going to go into. And the numerals have to be all spelled out. So if you say, it took me 5 days to get there, you have to spell out 5 because it helps with syncing up the voice acting. You can't use numerals. Most important probably is character limits, and you'll see a lot of comments about this. Player lines have a limit of 80 characters. You cannot exceed that. NPC lines have a limit of 149 characters. You cannot exceed that. But you also shouldn't go below that, because every single NPC line that's recorded is its own file. And if you have a 5-word sentence like, and why shouldn't I be? And then you start a new line for the next sentence, those are separate files. It just takes a lot of space. So you want to combine lines wherever possible, as long as you stay under the 149 character limit. This is just for the economy of space in the program itself. And then we'll go back up here and look at the colors. We use several colors that you're going to be asked to use in your writing. Implementation notes are always in purple. Voice acting notes are in orange, and shared lines, identical lines, if you repeat a line, they're going to be in blue. And I'll show you a little bit of that later. So on every one of these examples, you'll see this header, and then you'll see comments along the side that point out things you should be looking at. So please do read the comments. Don't check them off because then no one else can see them because they disappear. But look at the comments as you go when you're looking at, especially when you're moving up levels to see what the new level is asking you to do. So let's start with the header, essentially, of an NPC. What information do you have to give before you actually have the text of what is going to be in the game? These are things that are not seen by the player, but they are seen by the leads to your projects and by implementers. So it's important to have this information in a standard codified way, because then people will find what they're looking for. They'll see it in the format they're used to seeing it. So the NPC name, give the name of your NPC. You can also put that up here instead of basic NPC example. The location, where in Tamriel is this NPC found? the region, the town, if there's limitations on where this person can be found, like Vipsani is only at the winery, just save that. It's just a general locator. And then we have a short bio, 100 to 150 words. You don't have to go into their entire backstory, but the bio should include race, gender, age, occupation, physical description, something for the implementers to know what this character is. Is this an orc or is it an Altmer? That's important to know. And what are they wearing? Especially if there's anything in particular you want them to wear, this is where you specify that. But then also, the bio has a little bit of backstory about this character. This stuff doesn't actually have to make it into the dialogue that you have, but it's a good way for you as a writer to discover who your character is. You might actually have written a longer backstory just when you're trying to figure out this character, but this gives a sense of who the character is, what their emotional state is, what their attitudes are. Are they hostile to all Argonians? Are they in mourning? You know, this kind of stuff, it's just a nice background information, but it helps you discover what makes your character unique. And then we have the residence. Where does this person live? Where are they found? It doesn't have to be long, just some little thumbnail sketch of where they are. And the bio and the residence and all that stuff, it's not a preview of coming attractions. So you don't have to tell us in the bio or even in the residence section what's going to be in the dialogue. It's just a backstory. It's not a preview. Then we have the schedule. This is really important because implementers need to know where to put each of your NPCs any time of the day. They have to know that. So we use a 24-hour clock, and you make sure all hours are accounted for. But also, you have to realize that the time that elapses in-game goes much more quickly than the time that elapses in real life. So you have to make sure that the NPCs can get from one place to another in the time you allow them. So if you allow them 1 hour, that might only be 7 minutes of playing time. So you have to make sure they can get where they need to be and have enough time to do the thing they need to do. So we try and have blocks of time that are no smaller than an hour, ideally 2 hours. And don't use half hours because that's just a pain. Nobody likes half hours. So it doesn't have to match real life. The schedule that the NPCs have, they don't have to sleep 8 hours a day. They don't have to have lunch at, noon. Whatever you want them to do is what they need to do. It doesn't have to be real life. Oh, I've got this person working at his at the blacksmith shop for 7 hours without a break. Oh dear, that's terrible. No, it's not terrible. It just means it's a game character. It's not a real person. So it's important as you do your schedule to look at where the NPC is and whether the player can encounter them. If your NPC stays inside studying all day, when is the player going to meet them? When they just happen to walk into the NPC's house? Sure, fine, but wouldn't it be nice to meet them on the street? If you're going to go to all the trouble of writing an NPC, be sure that the player has a chance to encounter them. Otherwise, it's sort of a waste. So you want to make sure that they're outside or in their shop or on the street or moving from one place to another for enough hours of the day that the player can encounter them. There's a couple other things that you might see on an NPC document, and that's from usually a more advanced document. So I'm switching over to Gwenara, who is a very bad alchemist, and she has specific assets. Assets are things that implementers have to create. So you list specific things here. If it's just a vanilla sword or shield, don't worry about it. But if you want a specific item, you would put that here. You can even put that here if you want to change the name of an existing asset. So if you want your character to have the Sword of Amazing Fieriness, it's just a vanilla sword with a new name, but you would still list that here so the implementer knows that they have to create something that's marked as the Sword of Amazing Fieriness. And then you'd say it's a vanilla iron sword with a fire enchantment that does this, this, and this. Gwenara's potions and amulets are listed at the bottom of her document because they're a little more complicated. She has an amulet that causes the player to cluck randomly when they're near chickens. She has another potion that's supposed to make no animals attack, but it also has the side effect of attracting any goats next to the player. So these are listed down below because they're a little more complicated. Ordinarily, you would simply list them up at the top here. You also might see associated quests when you're on a project and your NPCs are going to be appearing in quests. That would be here as well, right after the assets, so that, again, the implementer knows there's more dialogue that this NPC has, but it's on a quest document. For the purposes of the AU, you're not linking your NPCs to quests. You should not have any quest dialogue in your NPC documents. Quest dialogue goes on a quest document. And we're going to try and have another lecture in the future that goes over quests, but at the moment we only have me doing NPCs. So just remember that NPC documents do not include quest dialogue. So let's look at what it does include. What do you have on an NPC document for the actual lines that you have to write for your characters? First of all, you have greetings. They have to be character specific. Every project is going to have generic greetings. So they'll have, a middle-aged Altmer woman voice type that says, "What? What can I do for you?" You don't have to write those. Those will be done on the project itself. The greetings you write should be specific to your character. They should work in as barks as well, because a lot of times the greetings are played when the character is near when the player is near the NPC. So you don't want them to be really long and involved. They should be fairly short, about one line or less. And you should imagine the player coming near to your NPC and hearing these, as well as if they interact with the NPC. They can click on the NPC to, talk to Vipsania and get these greetings started as well. But they will often start just by proximity. You'll see that the greetings and the farewells are bulleted. They're not numbered. This is because they can be given in any order. Greetings and farewells are randomized. You can't count on the player hearing any one of these greetings in particular the first time they show up, unless you mark it as an initial greeting and it absolutely has to be the first one they hear. It will be randomized. So all of these greetings have to lead into the dialogue in some logical way. So take a look at Vipsania's greetings. She works in a winery. Every one of her greetings says something about wine, because that leads into the player dialogue where the player can say, "Well, you certainly seem proud of your wines." But if one of her greetings was, "Boy, I get tired at the end of the day," and that's the only thing the player has heard, then the player saying, "You certainly seem proud of your wines," doesn't make much sense. So you want to make sure that all the greetings can lead to at least one of the dialogue lines that you're going to be giving the player. You can also condition the greetings. If, as I said before, the NPC hates Argonians, you can have a greeting if the player is an Argonian that's hostile. You can add that, and you would add that as an implementation note. Let's look quickly at Gwenara. She has a few greetings, and these are all conditioned. This is how you condition a greeting. You put it in brackets, in purple, at the beginning of the line. And this one is, these first two greetings, actually all her greetings, are conditioned on where she is. Is she walking along the road? Is she seated in camp? Is she working at her alchemy station? And then because she's sort of a little flower child, I've thrown in a greeting that only happens on one day of the year. It's the Festival of Flowers. So those are the conditions for her greetings. Her farewells also are conditioned. She's a merchant. So you can have a farewell if the player bought something and a different farewell if they didn't buy something. So there's lots of things you can use to condition greetings and farewells to make them particular. Don't get too carried away with, making the NPC have 15 different greetings all conditioned on different races. Use them judiciously. Remember, each line has to be recorded, and that swells the size of the game. So make the conditions reasonable. If you want to have a race-specific condition, then have, if the player is Argonian, if the player is not Argonian. You don't have to have if the player is Argonian, if the player is an Orc, if the player is an Orc, if the player is a Dunmer. Just try and group them in some way to be economical, but also allow you to condition things the way you want them. Farewells are very similar in the fact that they're randomized. They can be conditioned. They can be conditioned on the choices that the player makes in the dialogue, like purchase something or don't purchase something. You can also specify that a branch of dialogue ends with no farewell. And we'll talk about that a little later. If the dialogue ends with a hostile interaction between the player and the NPC, then you don't want the NPC to say, well, that's enough. I don't want to talk to you anymore. And then have the farewell play that says, have a good day. Wouldn't make any sense. So you can specify that there's no farewell if there is a hostile exchange. But keep in mind, just as the greetings all have to work as a lead-in to the dialogue, the farewells all have to work as a follow-up to the dialogue. So you don't want them to be specific to only one branch of dialogue unless you condition that line. And we'll look at that a little later also. So that's the greetings and farewells. Now we get to the actual back and forth dialogue. Before you start doing the dialogue section, you're going to go up here to the very top for automatic numbering and go to numbered lists. And you're going to click there and you're going to select this third one here on the right, because this will allow Google Docs to create the numbered outlines that we use. You cannot hand number things. It doesn't work. It also makes it very hard if, for example, something gets edited and the line numbers change and you have to hand number everything again. So don't do that. Use the auto numbering feature. And if you don't use it, then the teachers are likely to send your work back and say, please auto number, and then we'll take a look at it. So that's very important. And the player is given options throughout. That's the whole point of gameplay, is that the player gets to choose things. So you want to make sure you allow the player to ask different questions in response. The player's lines tend to be follow-up questions or reactions to what the NPC says, just like in a regular dialogue. You don't tend to switch topics in the middle of a dialogue. If you're going to switch topics, you start a new thread of dialogue. Every thread of dialogue, I'm calling them threads, not branches, because we use branches when we talk about quests a lot. But every thread of dialogue, we have a player line and then following lines from the NPC. Always has to end on an NPC line and always has to have an implementation note to tell the implementer what happens next. So you'll see notes like back to root. Root is the earliest set of options. So if you want the dialogue to go back to root, you're asking the implementer to then show the player these lines, 1, 2, and 3. If you want to give the player the option to ask a different follow-up question, so they have multiple opportunities to ask things, you would say back to options. Back to options says go back to the most recent set of options. So in Vipsania's case, the player can say, well, it's awfully isolated, you get lonely. And then she mentions her daughter. And she also says, yes, she is lonely. So one follow-up is, well, why don't you leave if you're lonely? But you also want the player to be able to ask about her daughter. So back to options gives you both of those. Same thing here. Back to options here, after what happened to her, goes to the most recent set of options. In other words, what happened to her? Where is she now? The player can ask both those things. It does not go back to why don't you leave then, because that's a previous level of options. It can get a little confusing, but just keep in mind that back to options is the most recent set and back to root is the earliest set. So implementation notes can be back to options, or they can be end dialogue. We're done now. I have work to do. There's no reason to go back to options after that. If the players, the NPC says, we're done here, or something else that seems like a closing line, then you say end dialogue. We tend to try and use the same phrasing throughout. So we use imperative verbs. This is instructions to an implementer. So you say end dialogue, not ends dialogue. You're saying to the implementer, end the dialogue. Unlock this line, not unlocks this line. It's just a grammatical consistency that helps everybody be on the same page. And you'll see that in the Unified Style Guide. The whole point of the Unified Style Guide is that everybody's on the same page. All the projects are using the same grammar, the same structure, the same method of giving instructions. It just makes it a lot easier all around. And it also helps you as a student. If you master this style that we're teaching, then when you go on to another, move on to a project that you're going to be working on with leads and other writers, you're already familiar with the format. You don't have to learn something new. So it helps you to master it now. And then you don't find yourself sort of behind everybody else when you get onto a project. So other colors that we use, you'll see, are these orange ones. This is for voice acting notes. This tells a tone that you want the voice actor to use. Not every line needs to have a voice acting note. Sometimes, and in ideal conditions, your writing should reveal what tone the NPC line should be said in. You certainly seem proud of your wines. And why shouldn't I be? They're the best you'll find. You don't have to say proudly, because the line itself it indicates that she is proud. It confirms that. However, when there is a change of tone, you do want to use an implementation note so that if there's different ways a line could be said, you specify how you want that line said. So when she says, I'm afraid those sequins will die with me, after she says, well, there's nobody left, I'm the last of my line, she can say it sadly, she can say it mournfully, she can say it angrily. There's a lot of ways she could land that line, but the writer specifies she is resigned. That's the way this line should be said. So use the VA notes when you have a change of tone or when you have a specific tone you want to have the voice actor use. And again, we have a grammatical format. We don't say sadly, we say sad. We don't say adamantly, we say adamant. These are minor things, but it helps you to be consistent with everybody else on the other projects if you learn them now. Just as every NPC thread of dialogue ends with an implementation note that follows the dialogue, any VA notes have to precede the dialogue. You cannot have any kind of implementation or VA note in the middle of a line of dialogue. It either has to be at the beginning or at the end. And then there are some vocalizations that are not dialogue, that are not voice actor notes, like down here at 2.2, sigh. A sigh is something the voice actor actually has to do. A sigh, a laugh, a chuckle, a sob, any of those things are voice. Those are vocalizations. And so they are part of the actual line that is being said. They are not voice actor notes in orange. Those are in black, in parentheses. They are part of the line. This also means when you're counting characters for your lines, you have to count them. They are part of the line itself. And just so we know, let's look at how you know how long your lines are. Remember I said that NPC lines have a limit of 149 characters. How do you find that out? Well, you block the amount of text, and then you do Control-Shift-C, which you will see in the comment on the side, and you get a word count. Pages, words, characters, and characters excluding spaces. Spaces count. So don't use that last line. Use just the character count here, 141 characters for these 3 sentences, or 4 sentences in fact, and that's within the limit. So same thing for player lines, just block the text, count the characters, do a character count, and make sure that you're under 80 characters for that. All right, there is a third color we use, and that's when lines are repeated exactly. So you'll see down here in Vipsonia, when she's talking about her daughter, she says, she's far away in Whiterun. When the player says, where is she now? She's far away. My niece, Adrienne Avenici, gave her an apprenticeship. Well, there's another way of getting to that, which is if the player says something about hammering, because the daughter's a blacksmith, this line is repeated exactly. So you can use blue type for that, for the second version of the line, or third or fourth, if you're going to repeat it in several different places. It's set in blue, not the first instance. We want the first instance to be in black because that tells the voice actor this line needs to be recorded. The reason for the blue is to say, don't record this line, you've already done that. So we like to have black for the first instance and blue for anything repeated. But it has to be repeated exactly. So if, for example, this was combined, she's far away, I can't talk about this anymore, that's no longer an exactly repeated line because the first instance of it simply says she's far away. My niece gave her an apprenticeship. It ends here. So you have to make sure that this repetition is exact. All right. There are a couple other colors that are used on most projects, and that's for persuasion. When you persuade or intimidate or bribe, you can succeed or fail. And you'll see on Gwynnara, the player tries to persuade her to tell more of her story. So you have the line that the player says, and then you have the word persuade, which is counted as part of the line. And then you have in purple, how hard is it to persuade them? Is it an easy persuade? Is it really difficult? Then only players with very high speech skills can get this information. Or is it something that's always passed? If it's something you just want to make sure that the player knows, but you want to give a line that says, here, tell me more, you can say always pass. But usually it's average, easy, so forth. And then you have 2 conditions. One is if they fail, and one is if they succeed. Most of the projects will put failure and success in red and blue. It just is easy to know then that you've got both of those conditions. So feel free to use persuade checks and things like that. They make it interesting for the player. The player can't always just assume that everything they ask will be answered. It's nice to have them have to try a little harder. Same thing with intimidation. You can make those an easy or difficult, pass, fail. And there's lots of other kinds of skill checks. If you really want to get into that, look at the Unified Style Guide. It has a long section on skill checks, and it tells way more information than I can get into now, and probably more than you actually want to know. But that's where you'll find very specific instructions on how to do skill checks. All right, so that's the basic structure. Let's look at the logic of dialogue. You want to make sure that you have good gameplay and logical progression of ideas. Good gameplay means the player has options. The player doesn't just click to get an NPC line and then click to get the next NPC line and then click to get the next NPC line. The player gets to choose things and feel like they have some agency in what is being said. So keep giving the player options. If you look at branch 3 down here, where am I? Here. Oh, I'm on the wrong document. That's why I can't find it. Here we go. Branch 3. It comes off of the NPC saying, the player says, "This place is awfully isolated." She says, I used to complain about the noise of my daughter's hammering. So there are options, and they are about leaving, tell me about your daughter, and what do you mean hammering? So this is 3 different threads of dialogue. But you look at this on the page, and you'll see how vertical this is. Look how the lines stack vertically. You have 3 response lines to this option. You have 3 response lines to that option. You don't have to have the same number of response lines for every option, but you'll see how vertical it is. If you look at your text and it's diagonal, you have player line and then indent, and you have NPC line. Then you have an indent, player response, indent, NPC response, indent, player response, indent, NPC response. If it continues that way and it's diagonal across the page, that's a sure sign that you're not giving the player options. So just look at your lines on the page and make sure there is some verticality to it, that there are certain things that are at the same level, because that tells you you are doing good gameplay. You also don't have to have follow-ups for every line of dialogue. You'll see that root dialogue line 1, you certainly seem proud of your wines, has many different things that are said. And then, do you run the winery by yourself? Well, there's only her response, and there is no need for a follow-up. So try to vary the quantity of the NPC's responses and the places where there are options, because it makes it less predictable for the player, and that's better gameplay. If the player knows that every time they say something to the NPC will go on for 4 lines, and then the next question, there's another 4 lines, they tune out. They don't listen to the lines. They start just clicking through things. Oh, she's going to talk for a while. I don't need to hear this. If you want your stuff to be heard, then make sure there's variation and different kinds of responses. Some short, some long, but don't go on too long. It's very important that the player gets to do something. So a lot of times I see young writers have the player say, well, tell me your story, or what happened to you, or some line that invites the NPC to tell their backstory. And then they have 10 to 15 lines of backstory. what's the player doing all that time? They're just sitting there waiting until they have another option. It's boring. So you want to interrupt long monologues. You do not want to have more than 4 or 5 NPC lines in a row without the player being able to ask a follow-up question or give a reaction. Oh, that must have been terrible. And then the NPC can go on. Just break it up. Otherwise, the player is just sitting there and then finally just clicks out of it, just taps out because they don't have the patience for it. So make sure you have things that the player can do. You also want to constantly check the logic of your lines. Keep in mind that the player has options, and options means they can click on things in a different order than you wrote them. So if the 3 choices the player has are, you seem proud of your wines, you run the winery by yourself, and this place is awfully isolated, they don't have to start with, you certainly seem proud of your wines. They can start with, do you run the winery, or this place is awfully isolated. Just because you wrote them 1, 2, 3, the player can click in any order. So you have to make sure that everything works in any order. And that means you have to constantly be going back and forth between what you have on the page and looking back at the options to make sure they work. So the line, tell me about your daughter, has to come after something that mentions the daughter, right? If the player said, don't you get lonely? And all that Sanio said was, oh, I should say so. If she didn't say this other line about her daughter's hammering, then you couldn't say, tell me about your daughter, right? So you have to make sure any NPC dialogue leads into what the player asks. And anything the player asks comes logically after the immediate NPC response. Not the one that's way back here, but the one that's right immediately before it. So if you say, oh, she's not my daughter, I miss her so much, what happened to her, where is she now? These are questions that come after, I miss her so much. All right, so you just want to be sure that every player line logically follows the most immediate NPC lines that preceded it. Also, it's not necessarily as visible in this particular document, but you want to realize that players have different styles. Some players want to be aggressive. They want to say, well, what's that about? And others will say, can you tell me a little more? So give different play styles space in your dialogue as well. Don't always assume the player has to be polite or aggressive, but give the player the option to play out however they want to play. And you can see that in some of the more advanced documents as examples. So what happens when you go too far to the right? What happens when you're tabbing over and you're tabbing over and you're tabbing over and you want more options after a 4th or 5th level NPC line? Sometimes you'll get to the point where Google Docs won't let you go any further. So let's look at what happens then. That's when you use keywords. So we've got a discussion with Gwenara about her training. Why does she call herself an herbalist? What happened? What does that mean? And then she's going to talk about the side effects. That's an extensive dialogue which will have more indentations. It has more options. If we tried to just go straight to there after this line, to have her next line be here, NPC line, and then have the player have to respond to that, I can hit tab as many times as I want, and it's not going to go over anymore. So I can't have the NPC line be tabbed over one here because I won't get my indentation right. It will mess it up. So that means I have to start a new numbering all the way on the left-hand side. So you say go to, and then you give it a keyword, side effects. Scroll down, here's side effects. Now the implementer knows we go immediately to this player line. It follows this NPC line here. It had side effects. What kind of side effects? And then we can have all the dialogue and we don't run out of room on the right. Keep in mind that your documents are likely, when you're on a project, to be edited. There will be changes because of the lead's ideas, because of formatting constraints, because they decided they didn't want to have that particular story, whatever it is, your document might get edited. So if you say, go to line 2.1.3.5.2.1, and then it's edited, that line reference will make no sense. This is why we use keywords. If you say go to side effects or go to a specific point in the previous dialogue, it's helpful to have a keyword. And you'll see a lot of that, a lot of examples of that in the Unified Style Guide. It shows a lot of keyword examples and different instances when you can use keywords to good effect. Let's see if I've got everything covered. Do you have any questions at this point? I'm going to open it up briefly, and then we're going to go to the sample document. So if people have questions, no? No questions? It's all perfectly clear?
I mean, it's pretty good. Can we see the sample?
You ready?
Mm-hmm.
All right. Where did I put it? Hang on a second. I have to find it. Shoot. I should have keyed this up. Sorry.
Can you put in the name of it in just the search?
I'm going to do that.
Yeah.
There we go. All right. So what this is an exercise. It will be posted on the pin documents as well, so you can get back to this later if you want. And I've got it as viewer only, so you cannot make comments on this, and you cannot see my comments until I open those up. But for now, we're just going to have you look through this document. You might want to take notes on a separate page or in a separate Google Doc, whatever you want. You won't be able to write on this document. So that is the exercise. So you can pull that up on your screen and it should show it to you without my comments, and then we'll go over it with my comments. So take 10 minutes and look and see if you can find stuff. There's about 25 things that I think are wrong with this. You might find others, or you might not find those at all. But see what you can find. It's not a test. Don't worry if you don't find everything. But just take a look and see if you can find some of the things I've talked about. Okay, well, I think it's time to take a look at this. I don't want to have too much dead air here. I'm hoping that Pat will be able to link this to the YouTube channel, so you can always get to it if you go back to the lecture, and then you can do the test by yourself, however you want to do it. So let's take a look at the documents. Now, if you look up here, I'm in viewing mode. If I go to suggesting, then you can see all the comments. So if you're going to do this as a test for yourself, start in viewing mode so you don't get all the answers, if you will. And then when you're ready to check how you did, change it to suggesting mode. So you have this little green suggesting mode thing on. All right. So let's just do a quick run through. The name, the location is there. There's a bio. It gives all the information. And then it starts saying, when the player talks to her, she's going to do this, that, and the other thing. She's going to tell him how she came there. You don't need any of that. That's preview of coming attractions. The dialogue is the dialogue all the bio should have is backstory. You don't need to include coming attractions. The schedule. We have a problem here. For one thing, this is a half-an-hour block, which is too short. Also, if you see the schedule, it says she walks to the far shore of the island and it takes her an hour to get there. She fishes for 3 hours, but then she comes back and has lunch in a half an hour. Well, she can't get back. If it took her an hour to get to the far side of the island, how is she getting back for lunch? So this doesn't make too much sense here. And then if you look down here, you'll see there's a gap in the dialogue, or in the schedule, rather. What does she do between 20 and 21? You can't have gaps in the schedule. The implementer needs to know where everything is. So here's a more reasonable schedule for her that gives you consistently, every hour accounted for, and it makes sense in terms of logistics. So let's look at the greetings. The first two, these are generic. We don't need them. Then we have her greetings. Shh, you'll scare the fish. Well, that works great if she's fishing, but how does that work for the time that she's helping close up the shop? Doesn't work. So you need to condition that one. If Dolan Wen is fishing, in purple before the line, because it's a great line for a fisherman to say, but not all the time. And then, for example, at the inn, she would say the ale here is the real thing. Well, that doesn't work if she's fishing. So that was conditioned by being at the end. Always nice to see another wood elf who's left the forest behind. Nice line, but only if the player is a Bosmer. So you can condition this one if the player race equals Bosmer. And you can see how that's done in brackets. The comments can't have colors, so that's why these are not in color. But this would be in purple. If player race equals Bosmer, always nice to see another wood elf. Okay, the farewells. Remember I said that they're randomized? They shouldn't be numbered. These should be done with bullet points, which is up here at the top, bulleted list. Take a look at this line. Be glad you can leave here, stranger. Well, this has all the words you need, but it doesn't have the punctuation you need. Lines end with a period or an exclamation point or a question mark. You have to have closing punctuation. You also have to have a comma after here to separate it from the address stranger. These things seem very minor. Punctuation, capitalization, grammar. But they are important because, for one thing, they show that you care about your writing enough to make it grammatical and properly formatted. And it just means that your project lead doesn't have to struggle to make sense of things. So you'll see here, you can go to Grammarly.com if you're not sure about how verb tenses are done or anything like that, but don't run your document through Grammarly's document check function. For one thing, document checks and spell checks are not always very accurate, but also it messes up your formatting on this document, so don't do that. But do go to Grammarly if you have grammar questions. All right, let's look here. All these three lines, each one of those is a separate file in the game programming. You don't want that. And all three lines together have 149 characters, so you can combine those. All right. Down here, end dialogue and begin quest. Well, the begin quest stuff, anything quest related has to be in the quest document, not here. So this whole section here about maybe you can help me doesn't belong in this document. In a quest document, it would start with the NPC says the following, and it would say standard dialogue as item 1 on the root menu, and item 2 would be where the quest dialogue starts. So it doesn't need to be here. Also, keep an eye on the colors. End dialogue should be in purple. The colors are up here. This one is in magenta. We want it to be in purple, okay? This is just a matter of consistency and people seeing what they expect to see. Moving down, what is on line 2.2? Nothing, so there shouldn't be a 2.2. Once that's deleted, it changes this numbering, which is, again, what I talked about with editing. Numbers change. All right. And then this one, it ends with a player line and says back to root. Problem with that is you can't have an implementation note after a player line. It has to be after an NPC line. And then we have this long player line. You don't seem like you're cut out to be a fisherman. How did you end up in a place like this? This is 94 characters. Too long. Also, it seems a little bit personality laden, and this is something that the Skyrim dialogue tends to be fairly neutral for player lines. You don't have too much snark or attitude. It's better to have just simply, how did you end up in a place like this? As a player line, with it's not just shorter, but it's also less filled with personality. It's a little more neutral. Down here, VA note in the middle of the line, can't do that. Sarcastic. That belongs at the beginning of the line. It actually belongs up here where the sarcasm begins. Certainly does not belong in the middle of the line. Okay, so here's where we have logic issues. What kind are you? Coming after 3.1. Slippery rock attracts all kinds, right? And so a line that says, what kind are you? It works. But what happens if the player chooses to start here? I came here in the usual way. Slippery rock attracts all kinds. What's the usual way? And then we have some NPC dialogue. And the last line of that is, I knew you were a clever one who could figure it out if I gave you enough time. Back to options. And then the next player line is, and what kind are you? It doesn't make sense anymore because there's something else that could precede it. It's not just what happened up here that you have to look at. You have to look at what happens at the end of each option, and does that work? So I've given an alternative, some ways to fix that here. You can change back to options to back to root, and then this whole chunk of the persuade check and all that just doesn't get offered to the player. Or you can add a line after this, extend the NPC's dialogue to one more line that might say something like, not many of your kind around here. And now we've got the word kind, so that a follow-up question that says, what kind are you, makes sense. Or you could change the wording of the last NPC line that is already here and make it say something like, I knew you were a clever one, the kind who could figure it out given enough time. You can just add the word kind in here, something that will link to the next line so it makes sense logically, regardless of which order the player chooses to select options. All right, so let's see. I lost my place. Okay, so look at the tabbing over. Are you sure I'm truly interested? This needs to move over because it's a response. This is an NPC line. So it should be tabbed over. Look at how it alternates between bold, not bold, bold, not bold. It should always tab over every time it changes from bold to not bold. Here's a line that has an emphasis on shall. I shall suit myself. It's in italics to emphasize the word shall, but we don't use italics. This is a case where you would have a VA note in orange preceding the line that says emphasis shall, so that the voice actor knows how you want it read, but you don't have to worry about italics not being picked up. All right. What's the matter with this line? Well, it's way too long, so we can't have that. Here's a sigh. Remember I said sighs are actually vocalized. That needs to be in black and within parentheses as part of the spoken line. Here's something else I didn't talk about, but you might want to think about. you don't want to break immersion in the game. So you don't want to use modern slang or popular culture references, or even not recent popular culture. You don't want to quote Shakespeare, even if it's a proverb that you think everyone will know. If it's something that came from Shakespeare, then probably it doesn't belong here. Just keep in mind, you don't want to break immersion. Back to options. Again, that should be in purple because it is an implementation note. Why come to a dump like this? Remember what I said about personality-heavy lines. This one is not neutral. It's just not something that you would find in this game. It's fine for other games that have more snarky player responses, but that's not Skyrim. So, why come here is fine. So that's just an overview of things you might have found. You might have found other things as well. But this should help you see what things I find problematic about this. All right, so I want to tell you one thing. Well, I hope this has all been very helpful to you. Don't worry if you don't get all this right away. It takes practice. As you start writing in this format, you'll get used to coloring things different colors, tabbing over, using automatic numbering, and so forth and so on. Don't expect everything to be correct in the first draft. Not just format correct, but also logic. You have to go back and forth among your lines and make sure every line follows logically. It doesn't happen the first time through. Even for the most experienced writers, you always have to read everything multiple times, not just for spelling and that sort of stuff. So finally, for those of you who've made it this far, I have a little gift for you, which some of you may already know, but many people do not. Remember we talked about how you want to make sure the lines are purple or orange or blue or whatever. You do that up here by blocking the text and then going up here and then picking orange or blue or purple, right? Fine, no problem. However, that's tedious in the extreme. One quick way to do that is to go to, color a line purple or red or whatever, and then put your cursor on that line, and then go up to this little paint roller up here. I don't know if you're all familiar with that, but if you click on the paint roller 2 times, everything that you highlight will be in the format of wherever your cursor is. So all I have to do is highlight that, and it changes. I'm going to change this to editor so you can see it a little better. Changes immediately. All I have to do is highlight it. I can double click to highlight, and it changes it. Whatever I highlight will be in whatever format my cursor was at, whether that's bold or not bold or whatever color. So it's really quick and easy to go through after you've written your thing and just find back to options and highlight it. When you're done highlighting, click it once and that paint roller goes off, and now you can highlight and nothing changes. It just highlights. If you click it a single time when you're wanting to highlight things, it will only work for the very next thing you block. It won't continue to paint roll different colors. So that I found was a really handy way to get through a lot of formatting stuff after the fact, where I don't have to constantly be blocking and going up to the text color. So I hope that's helpful to everybody. You're welcome. Nice little tip. Thank you for listening, for watching. I hope to read all your submissions, and I hope this has been really helpful. If you have questions, you can post them on the Game Writing channel, because doubtless other people will have similar questions. I'd rather you do that than DMing me, because, as I said, if everyone has the same kinds of questions, then I can answer, and you're helping your fellow students by asking questions. So please feel free to do that. And I think that's about all I have to say. Anyone have anything they want to say?
I just have one more thing that I just thought of actually. Just in terms of formatting tips, making sure that you've gotten everything, especially if you're using the paint roller, which means that you're not coloring as you go along. One thing you can do is you can go to find and replace, or just find and put in an open or a closed bracket, and that'll bring you to all of the places that have brackets, which is
That's
all
true.
of the that you
Yes.
need to put in
Yeah.
some color or another. So
Right. So you can go here on edit and find and replace and look for open square bracket, and it will jump down to every one of those.
Mhm.
And
There we
then
are.
you go to the next one and the next one and the next one. So that's a good way to find them. That's true. Good point.
Wish that was a tip, but I literally just thought of it, so I have never done it before. But it seems fun.
There's also a way you can change things. If you had things in the wrong color, let's say you put all your implementation notes in magenta and you went, oh damn, they're supposed to be purple. There is a way to highlight a word and then what I can't remember what it is. Then you can make everything that is in that particular format be changed. Where is it? I don't use that very often.
I see. Hang on, let me, because
I can't remember where it is because I don't tend to use it.
Yeah, it only happens when you're having to do it.
I think I know. Wait,
Yeah, select all match
right
text
click on it.
effects.
Right click on it, and then it says Format Options, Select All Matching Text. Okay. So it will select everything that matches that.
Mm-hmm.
And so you select all matching text, and then it blocks it all, and then you can change it to whatever color in one fell swoop. So that's another handy way of doing it. Just highlight the word that's formatted and right click and go to Format Options. So these are some shortcuts that help. Any other comments or questions from anyone? No? Okay.
Hi.
Yes?
Could I ask a question?
Sure.
When we are writing an NPC, is there like a specific guideline on how many, for example, skill checks are maximum allowed, or the general feel of how complicated should this NPC be?
Well, a basic NPC, if you look at the example, it's only about 3 pages, so we don't want you to get very detailed for your first run through. What the point is to just get the formatting right the first time. When you move up to scribe level, then you have 3 to 5 pages for an NPC, so they can be more complicated. So don't spend too much time when you're starting out with vast numbers of dialogue threads and complicated jumps from here to there. Just try and get the formatting straight. But you'll have a chance as you move through the program to be more and more complicated. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Any other?
I can just chime in on that as well, just from a writing perspective in terms of persuade checks and in terms of like illusion checks or whatever it is. Just know every time you do that, you are limiting the amount of people who will see your dialogue. Because if they don't have enough for the illusion check, they're not going to get that answer. If they don't have enough for the persuade check, they're not going to get this dialogue. So just know that if you're planning on recording or writing rather a huge amount of dialogue after a persuade check, you're going to be in a position where a good number of players are never going to find that out. So
point. Yeah. And keep in mind, if you have a end dialogue implementation note at the end of a thread, and there were other options that the player could have chosen, they won't get those options. Or if you have back to root, they won't get the other options at that level. But that's okay sometimes. But just make sure that that's what you want. Other questions? No? Okay. Well, thank you for listening and participating. And if Pat links the Dolan Win document to the YouTube channel, then you'll have a chance to look at it again. I'm not sure if we'll pin it to the game writing channel, but I might put a line in the welcome document about it if it seems like it is appropriate. We'll see what Pat is able to do. All right. Thanks again. Bye-bye.